It can just be the power held by the rich.
They don't necessarily need to be in an official role, but nonetheless exercise outsized power for their own personal interest, their own personal wealth.
So if oligarchy isn't rich people running a government, what does it actually look like? So for the most part, it looks like this obsession that extreme wealth gives you. It gives you power, but it also gives you this specific obsession with protecting that power.
Throughout history, if you have an enormous fortune, others are threatening it. Other oligarchs threaten oligarchs. So one way that the wealthy get much wealthier in feudal times, for example, is to knock off other oligarchs and take everything they have.
In other words, oligarchs in these days had to do literal wealth defense, like physical.
What happens in the modern state is that for the first time, all of the defenses of wealth and property are actually in place by an armed state. That's what's different. Oligarchs are willing to give up their role as rulers and being armed in exchange for a very strong guarantee from the state to do those functions, which allows oligarchs to appear as simply wealthy, not needing to be political, not relying on coercion.
But just because the state technically is meant to protect your wealth and your property for you, it doesn't mean that your wealth is completely safe.
States can be redistributive. They can use taxation and other kinds of policies to reduce the overall wealth of oligarchs and redistribute it in society.
So historically, being an oligarch meant having to use your power to defend your wealth. This way. Today, being an oligarch still means using your power to defend your wealth, but now you're trying to defend it against this, against the government trying to tax you. So my next question is, what does this actually look like today?
Banking bombshell causing shockwaves around the world.
Richest, most powerful people on the planet
hiding their money in an effort to avoid taxes.
Global shadow financial system for the rich. Secret offshore accounts.
Money laundering.
Widespread corruption and tax evasion.
Panama
Papers.
Panama Papers.
I remember the Panama Papers story breaking like a decade ago.
Yeah, it was huge.
And I think the reason that I didn't understand it is it was necessarily a very complicated story. It involved the analysis of just like terabytes of data and the mapping of connections. The Panama Papers were the leaked documents of this one company based in Panama. They were called Mossack Fonseca, basically a one-stop shop for wealth defense. They served lots of different types of people. So there were criminals among their client base. There were also politicians. There were also like just regular old millionaires, right, who wanted to like use them to set up a trust or something. But a huge part of their client base was oligarchs.
The key thing about tax avoidance is you can only afford to do that once you've amassed a certain amount of capital.
An echelon of services that is only available to the richest of the rich. At the core of what these sort of major players in the wealth defense industry are doing, it's actually not that hard to understand. If you imagine any kind of asset, it can be money, it can be property, it can be stock or whatever. The government can only tax an asset if it knows who owns it, because you can't tax nobody. And so the job of the wealth defense industry is to muddy the link between an asset and its owner. You can see the asset, but you don't know who owns it. And you can see the rich person, but you don't really know what they own. The point is that the connection between asset and owner runs through a maze that is impossible to navigate.
The webs are different every time.
These shell companies, you can't emphasize how important they are to everything from campaign finance and financial secrecy and offshoring to the rise of oligarchy. They are this kind of core ingredient that touches on everything.
It sounds like this is supposed to be shadowy and difficult. I would love to understand at least a teaspoon of how these people hide their money.
So it's the whole thing here is that it's complicated.
This is sort of like what somebody laid out on a napkin for me. On a basic level, you have investors or limited partners, and there's city fund administrator. All of this comes down to a Cayman fund, right? There's
Cayman
a
Islands.
management agreement with an investment manager subsidiary in Hong Kong. Private placement memorandum. It's structured to have investments in Russia, Africa, Ukraine, Southeast Asia. Every single person only has a view of the structure that they worked on.
Okay, well, I didn't understand any of that. Okay, so they're hiding their money, they're doing it super well. How much are we talking here?
The amount of money that governments around the world basically don't get to collect in taxes globally, it's about $500 billion a year. Right? And that's not the amount of money that's like offshore. That amount of money is like, between 10 and 15 trillion, right? We're just talking about like the money that would be generated by that money that governments could collect in taxes that they could use to fund programs to help their people. $500 billion every year they're losing out on. In the US alone, it's in the neighborhood of like 100 billion that we miss out on every year. It's not remake the United States government money, but it is a couple government agencies several times over. And in 2001, they determined that the average American is paying 15% more in taxes because of the taxes the ultra rich aren't paying.
The whole problem is anything that's not being paid that should be paid. I mean, that's basically what the honest taxpayer is making up, which basically means that everybody is paying 15% more.
That's 25 years ago. And I got news for you. The ultra rich pay less in taxes than they did 25 years ago. So that number is almost certainly more than 50% today.
So we pay more in taxes because these guys hide their money from the government. Wow.
Now, to be 100% clear, wealth defense encompasses like a lot more than just tax evasion. When these guys do wealth defense, it does look different, right? Like the world's 40th richest guy, very rich, billionaire. The state that he lived in was going to raise taxes on the rich. He spent a few $1 million on an ad campaign to defeat the law. It worked. Now he pays way less in taxes because of it. Or there's this Australian mining billionaire. Australia put a new tax on mining, so he started his own political party, got a few people into parliament. Parliament repealed the tax. These things are wealth defense too, but they are like one part of it. And what Winters and people like him say is that the oligarchs, the people whose wealth gives them power and whose power they use to defend their wealth, right? It's not just Bezos and Zuckerberg. It's a class of thousands upon thousands, most of whom you have never heard before.
Not long ago, Elon announced that SpaceX is acquiring xAI, which could create the most powerful tech company in the world. And as a handful of billionaires continue to expand their influence across AI, media, and geopolitics, the line between corporate and government power is starting to blur in strange and kind of dangerous ways like we've never seen before. That's kind of why we're making this video. These shifts are happening incredibly quickly, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Who controls the technology? Who shapes the information we receive? Who actually holds the power? And how the world is changing because of it has become harder than ever to follow through the noise, which is why I've been partnering with Ground News, who's today's sponsor. I've partnered with them for over a year. Ground News is an app and a website that pulls thousands of articles from all around the world, and it organizes them by story. It breaks them down by bias, reliability, and who owns the sources you're reading. Ground News has been recognized by the Nobel Peace Center for advancing media literacy. And here's why that matters. Take the story we were just talking about with this big merger. This was covered by over 400 outlets, all with different angles. With Ground News, you can look at them all in one place. You can filter by ownership, factuality, location. This allows you to see the full context before you decide what to think. Like take these two. You have this left-leaning outlet that focuses on the scale and concentration of wealth and power, framing this merger as part of Musk's growing corporate empire ahead of a potential public offering. Whereas this right-leaning outlet focuses on innovation and ambition, framing this merger through Musk's goal of accelerating humanity's future. Same story, two totally different angles. Every outlet chooses their narrative and leaves out the bits that goes against that narrative. What Ground News does is it makes all of that visible. I've been using this app for years because it gives me full transparency that I can't really get from anywhere else. It allows me to be a more critical thinker. And it's completely subscriber funded, so there's no corporate influence deciding what you see. So you can get in on the Vantage plan, which is the one I use, gives you all these features, and you can get 40% off that plan if you sign up with my link. It is ground.news/Johnny Harris, or you can scan the QR code here on screen. That's ground.news/Johnny Harris to finally see the full picture on every story. With that, let's get back to our story on oligarchy.
I almost automatically had this picture of like, okay, this industry is doing so much damage to our society in a way. It must be masterminded by a few nefarious people, by a cabal. And the bottom line is that if you want to picture like who are the workers in this industry, the best way to picture it is to go to Shutterstock and type in financial service worker, and that gives you the perfect picture of who is working in this industry. It's just this guy.
Now we know what he's doing. He's setting up the shell company.
Yeah, this one actually I think has a tough client because she gets kind of frustrated at this point.
And probably like, if this pays well, which I imagine it does, you're actually attracting some of the best minds to go protect people's wealth.
I mean, this is what Kimberly Hong told me, right? She teaches a lot of students who are there because they're like the smartest of the smart, not because they're the richest of the rich. And those people are like, listen, I'd love to work for a public interest law firm, but like...
Even at the age of 21, they're like, well, how can I live a comfortable lifestyle? Well, to go work in the private sector, to lend your like talents and your brain to the private sector. And most students are pragmatic, right?
Yeah, and part of why I wanted to pull this stuff is that...
He just had a big idea.
I mean, this guy just came up with like the 1000th iteration of the shell company maze structure that he came up with that day. These are not people who see themselves as doing bad things. And I don't know, maybe they aren't. These are just people with jobs. This is how I kind of look when I do my job.
Many of the people that I study, they'll say, well, yeah, that's all true. But if the systems were different, I would do it differently. I'm just a cog in the system. Until the systems change, this is how I have to do business.
These guys get really good at stuff, and probably way better than the government gets good at enforcing stuff.
The state in the United States now doesn't have the capacity to pay regulators the salaries that they can make in the private sector.
So the big lesson for me, the big reframe that I'm having right now is like, oligarchs are not just people who like buy elections and squash tax reform. It's actually a lot more vanilla. It's like people who can afford to hire these armies of wealth defense soldiers who help hide their money from taxes. It's like way more widespread and way quieter and way harder to actually see and track down.
Right. And the thing that Winters wanted us to understand is that this level of wealth, it gives these people power whether or not they choose to use it. You can buy an election, you can make an effort to pay zero taxes, or you can not do those things.
I would argue all of them are oligarchs, whether they're active or not. They can turn on that power anytime they want. And it's that capacity they have that we don't have, which distinguishes us from them.